And we're live. Welcome back to another Corona Geek here, where we talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. I'm your host, Charles McKeever, and today we've got a lot to talk about. I tell you what, we have been on task here building an endless runner game for seven videos now, I think it is. We've done everything from talk about the requirements for the project, look at how the project organized. We've supplied code so that you can follow along. Player objects and particle effects and the whole bit. So we haven't created a what would we call it earlier, a work of art, so to speak, but we have been laying all the ground for the mechanics and fundamentals and getting everything in there. So this is going to be our last video in the series, provided we can get everything in. We're going to talk about adding particle effects enhancements, which is just basically tweaking what we did last time. We'll add in scenes so that we can navigate between the intro screen and the restart screen and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll also add in some audio so that we can get that good old boom, boom, boom going. Not sure exactly what that means, but we'll get it going. And joining us today on the panel, we've got a lot of great people here today. We've got Dr. Brian Burton down in Abilene. Hey, Brian. We've got Ed Marina from Portland here from roaminggamer.com. Eric is joining us from Lava Level over there on Quest Lord. If you haven't checked out Quest Lord, do so. Go check it out in the Apple Store. Also, we've got Sergey joining us from Russia, and we've got Steven from down in Mexico. So, and then we've got one guest here, Austin, who is joining us from, I'm going to say Austin maybe, right? Austin, you going to join us for Austin? I don't know. Anyway, he's in the chat. If you guys have questions or whatever, throw them in the chat as we go along. And let me see here. We've got a couple of things that we wanted to talk about before we get started. One of them is that Google is changing their policies on mobile sites. So I don't know if you guys saw the announcement. Go over to twitter.com/coronageek and you can see everything there. And basically what we've got is, let me turn my video around here. We've got YouTube, or not YouTube, Google is changing the way that they're going to treat websites. So basically, if you have a website today, if it's not mobile responsive, then come April 21st, Google is going to penalize you for that. And what do we mean by mobile responsive? So basically, if mobile responsive is formatting the content that a viewer sees based on the device that they're on, or the size of the real estate that they have available to them. So if you go on to a website on a mobile device like a phone or a tablet, you're going to have a different user experience than they do when they go to a desktop screen or desktop browser. And it's a little bit different than what mobile friendly used to be. It used to be the term mobile friendly. Now it's called mobile responsive. And anyway, so Google has said, you know what? We've got a lot of people accessing content via mobile. Mobile is it's mobile first, and mobile this, mobile that, and so they're going to start favoring websites that are mobile responsive. So if you haven't seen that already, check out the show notes. We've got a link to Google's announcement. You can also we'll put links to WordPress themes that are mobile responsive. We'll put links to page builders or site builders that are mobile responsive, and it's just something to go ahead and do. We probably all should have been doing it anyway, but now Google's kind of forcing it, and they kind of lead the charge on that kind of thing. So you guys go check that out. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I want to say hello to everybody that's on Meerkat. So over here to my right, I've got my iOS app running. That's running Meerkat. Now, if you guys haven't heard of this, it's the latest thing in fashion, in tech fashion. It is. It's live streaming via your mobile device. Now, there's been live streaming services that have been around for a long time, but the space is really heating up, and Meerkat has a great app where you can schedule broadcasts and things like that, and also. Twitter has released their app called Periscope. Now, Periscope, what it does is basically the same thing, but you can go back and watch broadcasts that have been recorded on Periscope. So they're kind of in competition with each other, and there's a lot of hoopla about Twitter restricting or removing Meerkat's access to their API. And so because Twitter was getting ready to release their version of the app and all this other stuff. Anyway, it's created a lot of hoopla and a lot of buzz at South by Southwest here in Austin. And what it really means to you and why you should care is that means that people are paying attention, people are watching broadcasts on their mobile devices, and that means that you can get in front of them while they're paying attention. So generally what you're talking about is somebody's going to get on, they're going to watch a few minutes maybe worth of video, depending on how interesting it is, and then that means that you can provide them with the little snippets. Like this morning, I created a video, a little live stream on the Google announcement, and said, hey, here's what Google's doing. Here are some WordPress themes that you can use. Here are some page building sites that you can use for free, and here are some that are paid. And that was about a couple minutes long. So you're just creating these real short snack-sized pieces of content that people are paying attention to, and while you're there, they can follow you, and then you can follow up with them later on with other pieces of information. So if you've got an app that you're trying to promote, here's the thing: go make your site mobile responsive, and then use something like Meerkat or Periscope to talk about your app, to talk about how it was developed, or just build a relationship with your community. So we'll put links in the show notes to all of those, but just be aware that those types of things that are happening. And I know that discovery is a big part of the conversation for developers these days. We've got the tools, we've got shows like this where we can talk about how to build things, but then beyond that, we need to market them and get them in front of people. So, having our website discoverable on Google and being able to get in front of people using these live streaming technologies is something that is very interesting, or should be very interesting to all of us. So there you go. There's your perfect public service announcement for today. I will say that, like I said, we're going to continue our series here on the mobile game development. If you didn't get a chance to watch last week's show, Hangout 134, go over to youtube.com/coronageek, where we actually put in the particle effects. We added some code for tracking player progress, and also for scoring. So we created a heads-up display where you could see what the score was and how far the player had made it, and kind of switched up the particle effects. So go check that out. And that's on Hangout 134. Does anybody on the panel have anything they want to share before we get started? Eric? Eric's he's always on mute.
Eric asked a question.
Okay, yeah, what did he say?
He asked, what do you mean by penalize? And I would suggest that you mean that they're not going to rank you as high.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to. Go read the announcement. I'll put a link in the show notes. Go read the announcement. And they kind of talk specifically about how they want to treat things. But yeah, you can expect them to favor mobile responsive sites over non-responsive sites. So they're not going to. It's not like they're going to drop everybody out of their index, because that's how they make their bread and butter. But if they can favor one site over another, then that gives that site a competitive advantage over somebody else. And so you just want to. You want to do everything you can to make your site more attractive to search results, especially when we're talking about something as easy as just making your site mobile responsive. And making your site mobile responsive is not just about search engine optimization or some kind of being compliant with Google. It's about the user experience. Making sure that when somebody gets there, they can understand what your app is about, and that they can tap the button to go to the store and download it and get it on their device, right? So it's about the user experience as well. So. But I'll put a link in the show notes. You can go read all about that. If you have any questions, let me know. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, I had just a question. I'll do some reading on this Meerkat and Periscope business, but I'm kind of wondering what the ideal video length is for a video of that type.
That's a good question. I think that my wife and I have been experimenting with this over the weekend. She went to a health conference, had about 500 people there, and she saw that a couple of things. One was the title of your video makes a difference as to whether or not people watch it or not, right? So if you put somebody's name up there and said that they're, this person's presentation or something, that's unless people are excited about that person, they're not going to tap into it. But if you put an interesting title, right, like a headline of a newspaper, if you put an eye-catching title there, people are going to tap into it and watch. The second thing is that the content has to be interesting enough to watch, right? Like I went to the creek this week with the kids, and I took a little short video of the dog playing in the water, and people tapped in because it was local, it was relevant to the local area. But then they didn't really hang out a whole lot because it was just it wasn't really all that interesting. So
it wasn't a cat video; it was a dog.
It was a dog video, not a cat video. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So you have to imagine though, that depending on how interesting the content is, I would say that if you shoot for 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, clip, then you're good, right? Because you're just going to want to get in, have a conversation, and get out. But if your conversation is if your audience is really engaged, you could go 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I mean, whatever. I think the same thing is true on YouTube. We all know what it's like to find a video that's interesting, and then we hang out for the whole thing, and it doesn't matter how long it is, and then we find videos that are just not all that interesting, and 30 seconds is way too long, so. But I'm going to shoot for 1.5 minutes on videos, just to make them. It's almost like skipping commercials, right? If an ad on a video is, if the commercial is short enough, it's almost more of a pain to try to skip the commercial, especially like in podcasts where the commercial is only like 8 seconds long. It's more of a pain to try to skip the commercial than it is to listen to the commercial and go on to the next segment of the podcast. I think the same thing is true with videos. Just make it short and easy to consume, and then people will binge watch your material. So, I don't know. We'll see. If you guys have different results or whatever, let's talk about that as we go forward. All right. So one last thing here that I want to say is that we are playing our Geek games. Every month we play Corona Geek games for a $50 gift card. So this month we've been playing Zigzag Boom, which is also the game that we are using in the game development series that we're going to be finishing up today. And so all you have to do is play the Zigzag Boom, take a screenshot of your high score, and then go post it at facebook.com/coronageek, and the high score winner will be announced next Monday, and they will get a $50 gift card. So you have this week to participate, and then we will announce the winner next Monday.
Do we have a high score right now, Charles?
We do. I don't know what it is. I'm sorry. I know you were going to ask that, but
like 5.
It's 5. Yeah, we do, and
5 is going to cut it. You're beating my high score, but yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, we do. I don't remember what the score was, but it seems like it's in the hundreds, well into the hundreds. So if you haven't, if you got 5,
so I shouldn't bother.
No, you should definitely try. You should definitely spend all your waking hours trying to win this $50 gift card.
Take this game and make it look exactly like theirs, and then just put a score in so you can win. That'll be worth the $50.
Yeah, there you go. That's good point, Ed. Okay, I think that's it. So those are all the announcements, and I want to leave as much time as possible for the rest of our stuff. So Ed, where are we? What do we need to do next?
Where are we? Okay, so last week we ended off. I'm showing here. Everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
All right, good. So on the right side of the screen, you see basically where we left off. We had a score counter in the upper left, a speed, which was a feature not in the original game, but our game was a little bit too easy, so I decided to add a speed up. So every time you went past a corner, the player sped up a little bit, so this indicates our speed. Now last week, pardon me, as you said, we got into particles. Now, Sergey made an observation which I agreed with, which is when you run this, it looks good at first. That looks fine. But then once it starts going, it looks terrible. I mean, this is not what we want. This is more of what we want on the left side here. Or perhaps like this. So Sergey's suggestion was, Ed, why don't you use the built-in emitter object that Corona supplies? Now, this particle trail that we're seeing is I'm using the CB Effects library by Caleb, whose last name I can never remember. I should definitely write that down, but first name Caleb. And he's done an excellent job with it. But the one thing about it, now I could probably have tweaked these parameters a little bit, but what's happening here is this thing is generating the particle, and it's trailing behind a little bit due to the rendering sequence. That is, the object is moving, and then I'm doing a render, generating some particles, and I could probably adjust this and make it line up, but I just said, why don't I just take Sergey's suggestion and go ahead and make something that looks a lot better. So this week, what we've got is the CB Effects trail, but we're using a particle emitter as the sort of as the player body. Now that's not really what's going on. I'll show you in a minute. But when we run this now, this is what we get. Oh, well, I'm going to crash. Okay, so I'm excellent at playing this game. So this looks a lot better to me. Now I don't know if it's coming through well on the screencast here, but people can play this on their own machines, and I think that they will agree that it looks significantly better. And we could do more with it to make it even better. So how did I do this? What I did was quite simply added about 4 lines of code, if I recall. If we go into, I'm sorry. First of all, let me. In this week's release, which is the final release, you're going to see in the app folder under Zigzag Boom Clone will be 3 subfolders. The first folder will be empty frame. The second one will be framed. And the third one is standalone. So the standalone copy is last week's code with these player changes here, adding the particle effect. So if you don't care about the framework and you just want to see the difference in code, this is the version to go to. Now, a little bit later today, we're going to talk about putting the game in a framework, in a composer framework, to give it a splash screen, a main menu, and some options. And so that's what you're seeing playing out here. So in the player file, let me bring it back up. All I did was I included a library called PEX, which is something that I've decided to include in this project. It's a custom library that I wrote last year to load up all of the 3 major formats for particle emitters, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But basically, at the top of player, I included PEX, and I just said PEX is the name of the local variable that stores the module. And then I used a loader out of the PEX module to place in content layer 3 in the center of the screen an emitter defined by this file, which I will explain in a minute. I'm kind of doing this in reverse order. I'll show you how this was built. And the only other difference here, or the only other notable piece here is that I decided to move the particle into a subfolder. So I keep doing that. Sorry, let me just zoom out a little bit. So what I did here was I told the loader to use a folder, find the particle in a folder. That's all this is saying. So the interesting part here, which we'll get to in a moment, is the particle emitter definition and how we got that. So, but we're on line 2 of my changes. So line 1, require the module. Line 2, in the creation section, simply create an emitter, store it in a field called my emitter on player, and I could have called that anything. And I'm keeping track of this because I want to be able to remove it later. Let's see, and then the third line of code that I had, so it was only 3 lines. In the cleanup function for the player, I simply did a remove and removed player emitter. Now, actually, I probably didn't need to do this because at the cleanup time, I destroy the entire display group hierarchy, all the layers. And this was in the hierarchy. It was already added, so it would be removed by itself. But I like to clean up just in case. So I did a display remove and remove the emitter. And then, as you see a little bit later, I remove the player, and we're done. So, how did I make this particle emitter? Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll point you in the right direction. And the reason I'm not going to spend a lot of time is because this is one of those tweaky kind of things where you could spend all day getting it to look just right. Let me bring up.
Hey Ed, I do have one point to question you on.
All right.
So I know originally we used a library that you were.
Yes. It's terrible particle library. Okay.
And then we went to CBFX.
Yes.
And then I know you and Sergey had a conversation about using emitters, Corona's built-in, emitter library or whatever. And so now what I'm hearing is that we've got we're using emitters, but we're also using CB effects, right? So
Right. So why did I make that choice?
Yes, there you go. Thank you.
Okay. Let me. Okay. So Sergey demonstrated last week. It's too bad I don't have it. But what he demonstrated was the problem I had. Let me put this in a forward fashion. What you're seeing right here is the emitter object as created by Corona. It's a Corona emitter object. Let me bring up the. Where is it? It's literally the output of display new emitter, where I pass in some definition file. And in this case, what we did in the code is I used my own custom builder. I'll explain. So this custom builder is basically doing some manipulation of this file and then passing it in. I got all these windows here into display new emitter. Now the problem is last week I said I wanted to use this initially, but I found that as it was moving, the particles that it was generating were not trailing behind. And I didn't spend the time to figure out why. Sergey, on the other hand, made a little demo where he manipulated this by changing the gravity parameters, and he was able to get it to leave the particle trail behind. So the body will still look like this. Yeah, go on, Sergey.
For the people who viewing it on YouTube in recording, you can just watch our previous episode where I explained it at the very end.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes. I won't go through the details, but it was just a few lines of code, and it looked kind of like what I wanted. However, this week I experimented with that, and I decided that the cost, performance-wise, was very low, and I didn't want to add the extra code to do the trail, so I just used this to make it display like this, and it doesn't have a trail. So I used CB effects for the trail because I had the code, it was already working, but I wanted a nicer visual, so I used a very basic emitter that doesn't have any gravity parameters for the body of the player.
Okay, so you're just basically using the best of both worlds to get the effect that you want.
Yeah, the cost in this sense was very low. I mean, performance-wise, it's not going to make a bit of difference in how it performs on our device. So I went with both.
Okay.
All right. So let's see. Where was I? So how do we make the particles? That is, how do we create the particle definition file? Again, not going to go into a great deal of detail. Why? Actually, I wrote 2 articles on this last year in April. And so we will provide a link in the show. But the first of these articles talks about the 3 basic tools that are available to do this. The 3 tools that are available are Particle Designer, which is a pay tool, and it's for Mac users. And then there is the Starling Editor, which is a free tool, web-based tool, very nice. And then there is my tool, which is a pay tool, but low cost, and I used my own tool because I knew how to use it to generate these particles. So basically what I did was I loaded up the tool in the simulator, which is what you're seeing here. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Okay. Unfortunately, my screen size is not quite large enough to take this to full screen. That said, all I did was I loaded up the default particle, which is this flame, and then I went in and I changed the gravity settings to 0, and then I went over to the colors and I manipulated the colors a little bit, and I did some other things, and I'm not going to go through them all. And then what I ended up with was this particle emitter here, which I then saved by clicking the save button. And I'm just leading you through this in case you use this tool. And then I open up the sandbox folder. And in here, let's go ahead and delete them all. You had it open already, and you click save. Of course, it never works when you're trying to do it. Let's just do that again. Send, I'm sorry. Save is saving. Send. I don't even know how to use my own tool. Send. The reason it says send here, by the way, is I designed this tool originally so you could run it on your iPad or your whatever and then send yourself the particle definition so you could do your design work on the road. But that ended up being kind of a problem for some folks. And the reason is a lot of email clients would strip off these attachments because I attached these to your email. And so they'd get like the image or they'd get the definition file, but for whatever reason they wouldn't get both. So now I just encourage people to run it in the simulator, click send. It will generate a particle definition and save it in the temporary folder of the sandbox. So send, you get the image file, and you get the definition file. And it gives us some random number, so every time I click send, you get a new one. And these two go with each other. So 34019, they go together. Then I literally took these, went over, and I created a folder called Particles in the standalone, and I dropped them in there. And as you can see, I experimented with a couple of different ones here. And then I loaded them up with a loader, and I was done. So it was really quick. All right, so that's basically it as far as making it look prettier. But our goal this week is to close it out and to put it in a framework. So let's go ahead and do that. So as you recall, we've got the Hangouts. I can make that zigzag boom clone. And actually, when you download this, you usually get a zip file. So the root folder will be zigzag boom clone, and under here is app. And the one that we're going to be doing today is we'll start off with the empty frame, and then I'll put the content in it. So in the empty frame, see if I've got this running here. What I decided to do was some time ago we did a series on the Composer library, framework library, and some other details about it. And in that discussion, I provided a ready-made framework with splash screen, menu, options, etc. for people to populate. So I just copied that code and pasted it into this folder. And the only other thing I did was I added the SSK library, which goes along for the ride with most of my projects. And then I decided, what do I need? So for this game, if we look at the original game, let me bring up the document here. If we look at the original game, I believe they had a splash screen, and then they went right to the main menu. And then the menu had basically the option to click the play button, and it would start playing. These arrows here were to change the color of your player. We're not doing that. They had the ability to unlock more colors for your player. We're not doing that. Achievements and some special feature, I can't recall what this was, some kind of social feature. Then they had an info option where you can get details about who made the game, etc. And this little wheel down here was the options. So I said, what's the bare minimum things I need? A splash screen, a menu, and the options. That's all I want to address. So I took the splash screen, modified the one from the Composer demo. I changed the wording, and I made a few changes to give it a nicer look. As far as the color of the text, it's not that great. It doesn't look like theirs, but I'm not trying to achieve that. Just something similar. A blue background. It's got a 2-second timer, so when it loads, 2 seconds later, it fades over. Now the thing that I find interesting, I'm seeing a lot of games that do this nowadays, is a lot of games like to put the actual game content sort of like just sitting there in the background, ready to go. And then when you click play, the menus sort of fade away or they do something, and then you're playing a game immediately. You don't see like a scene transition where the scene moves left or gets loaded. So it's nice because you get this nice active background to your menu, and you get the immediacy of going right in and playing after clicking a single button. So with that in mind, what I did was I made a very simple menu that just has a play button, an options button, and it does nothing else. It doesn't draw a background or anything, because when I put our game in here, the game is going to fill in this content, and these buttons will float over the top of it. So the option screen slides in from the top, And basically what the options screen is for people who haven't watched the show, is it's a great big texture or rectangle, 10,000 by 10,000, so it appears right away, and it fades in, which gives us that, as you saw there, when I click it, it sort of fades in. It's blue. It's got a blue background. It fades into like 80% translucency. It's got a back button that takes us back. It's got a button for turning on the music, and it's a toggle button. That may be a little bit hard to see, but it gets a little bit brighter when it's toggled on. And a sound effects button, which is also a toggle button. So that's all there is to it. And then if I were to click play, that would be the signal to the game to start going. So a very, very simple framework. So let's go ahead and take that and start hooking it up with our game. And let me just go ahead and load the game itself so you can see how it actually operates. So there's our splash screen. It looks just like the previous one. So as I said, basically what we've got here is the menu has drawn these two buttons, and then it loaded up, it did everything else just like our old frameless version did. It initialized the game, it did everything except for start the game. So what does that look like? Whoops, just closed the wrong one. I'm closing windows willy-nilly here, sorry. Alright, let's get this out of here. Alright, so main Lua, holy moly, sorry. Oh, can you read that? Okay, let's make that a little smaller. Main Lua is completely different from the standalone version because this is for the framework. So what it does is it sets up system font or game font, it loads composer, loads SSK, loads these button classes that the framework comes with, sets some debug features. I've turned them off. I left all this stuff in here from the previous one, so people who want to experiment with that, that's good, they can do it. The only difference here is I turned on gravity because our game uses gravity, so I set that up right away in main Lua, just like we did previously in the standalone version. And then I loaded the splash screen. So if we take a look at the splash screen, there's nothing exciting. This is not a very special scene. This is pretty much the same as the original frame. The only thing I did was I set up, instead of using a embossed text, I tried that initially to give it a nice highlight and a color for the top and bottom edge, but I just didn't like it. So what I did is my own cheapo emboss. I basically just made the same text 3 times, and I made the bottom one orange, and I offset it up and to the left by 1 pixel. I made the highlight yellow-ish, and I offset that +1 to the right and +1 down. And then I made, oh, I'm sorry, that was white. And then, I'm probably not getting these right, but no, okay, the top one, the upper edge is white, the bottom one is orange, and then the middle one, which is the body of the text, is centered over those. So what you end up seeing is this. So it's quite yellow, but there's a slight white edge, it might be hard to see in the video, and a slight orange edge that's offset. So you can try this on your own, but I found that the embossed text did not give, this is what I was hoping for with the embossed when I set the colors, but it didn't work the way I liked it, so I did this instead.
Yeah, and you've even used the same size font for all that, so if you really wanted to, you could probably make zigzag like bigger and then bolder, you know, like a bold or whatever, and then
yeah, yeah, or you could like
play with it,
scale it up slightly.
Yeah,
there's a number of ways to approach this, but this was my
yeah,
30-second approach to getting an embossed effect.
Yeah, no Photoshop required.
No Photoshop or skills required at all. Okay, let me find that code again. All right, so nothing exciting about this file. Basically, it waits 2 seconds, or if you tap the screen, it goes to the main menu. The main menu, what do? I load game, which is what we used to do in main Lua. So I load the game module. I do all the other stuff that this this file used to do. So when it creates a play button and an options button. Let me see if I can get the windows up here. It creates this play button and this options button. Now here's the important thing. Composer provides you with a display group in self.view, which is the implied parameter passed in create. So I take that and I store it in a variable which has file level scope. So in other words, I made a local variable at the top of my file which will be visible to all functions below, and I stored that group in this variable called scene group. And then I created a new group called menu group, which I then put into scene group, and I put my two buttons into it. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to be able to pass this to the game init, and it would create a bunch of layers. But then I wanted a very easy way to float my buttons above all that. I didn't want to have to put my buttons in the game layers. I wanted to leave that part of my code alone. So I could easily rip it out, leave it standalone, or I could easily put it in here. So in a sense, what I've done is I've created one additional group, which then I simply push to the front after I initialize the game. And from then on, those buttons will always float over the content. I wish this would stop doing that. So all of this content that you're seeing here is the game module drawing the layers and the player and the hallway. And I've got my buttons nicely floating over the top so I can access them. If I had not done that, it would look like this. Not what I want, right? So my buttons are gone. I've got no way to start the game. Everything else about the way we initialize game is the same. So basically I just called game init. I passed in that optional group, which we didn't use previously, but it was set up for this exact purpose. And all the content is created in the composer group. So now composer is managing this group. If composer decides to destroy this scene, it will destroy all the layers that game created. Game, the module. All right, so what is left? We need to define the start button function and the options button. If we go down to the bottom of the file, there is a function called onPlay, which is hooked up to that play button. So when I click this, it executes this code over here. What that code does is it posts a custom event called onSFX, which we'll discuss in a moment, but basically it produces a sound if sound is enabled, the sound effects are enabled, a clicking sound. And then it hides that group, the menu group, where the two buttons live. And why do we do that? Because this is a merged sort of interface, and I want to get rid of these buttons while I'm playing, but I want to be able to quickly bring them back when I die, or when I fail and hit the wall. The only other thing I do here is, this seems a little bit weird at first, is the first time I run this, you'll remember that I already did the game init. So all I really need to do the first time you press the start button is actually start the game up. Start the player moving, start the hallway generating, etc., etc. But the next time I come in here, so when I play, the game starts, I hit a wall. What I would like it to do is wait a moment, as it did, and then redisplay the play button so I can click it and start over. So as you recall, previously we had some functions that did a restart, and the way it worked before was in the player file, when the player died, it waited 3 seconds, and I've changed this to 1 second. It waited 3 seconds, and it cast an event called onRestart, which was in game Lua, And in here we had this bit of code. Basically, it was listening for that event, and it would call this function, which was defined up here within game Lua, and it would stop the game, it would clean the game, it would reinitialize the game, and it would wait a period of time and start it over. We did that so we could test our code. So the game would run, we would play, we would die, it would wait 3 seconds and start over again. Great for testing, not great for the framework. What we want is some control here. And what I did was I retasked this event. So everything in the player works the same as it did before. You hit the wall, and I think, okay, sorry about that. You hit the wall, and you wait 1 second this time, and I throw the event on restart, or I post the event on restart. The main menu code is listening for that. I got a little function here, on restart, and what it does is it re-shows the menu group, which I hid before. It changes the alpha to 1. It takes half a second, and then that's it. All I need then is to click, and I can click start and start the game over again. And then the next time I click start, however, I need to stop the game, clean up the game, reinitialize, put us back in the center of the screen, and then restart the game. So just to take you through that.
So basically, the functionality hasn't changed, or not the functionality, you're not changing.
The order of events has not changed.
Yeah, the order. Yeah, you're not changing what you want to do. You're just changing how it does it.
All I'm changing is how it gets called, when it gets called. I'm changing from an endless loop of just calling it automatically to putting it under the control of this button. Right. So I press start or play. I do well for a little while, and then I kill myself. It waits a moment. The buttons show, and then I press play again, and I'm good to go. Or not, if I'm a terrible player. And I think, see, I've found a bug, actually. So, remember how I said, that's good, found a bug. What just happened there?
It didn't pass the first checkpoint, huh?
Well, not just that, but remember how I said this needs to float over the top? So the first time I do it, it's floating over the top, I start playing, I die. It brings it back. Great. But as soon as I destroy and remake this content, it's going to be in that group and it's going to be over the top of this. What I needed to do was change my code ever so slightly and take this little bit right here. Yes. Like that. Basically, I need to bring that layer back over the top because I destroyed all this content and then I drew it again, and it's now, the second time it was over the button. So now if I do this, I should kill myself, play, kill myself. Okay, well, I've messed up something, and I'm sure Sergey is seeing it, but I'll fix it before. Oh, yeah, the fact is I can't type. Sorry, guys. Okay, that's better. So, do all of this stuff to create the content. Do this. There. I hate making mistakes and having to fix them live. If this doesn't fix it, we'll just move on, because I'm not entirely engaged in this process. Okay, there we go. So show the group, bring it to the front. Show the group, bring it to the front. Make sure it's always on top. Okay, so what do we have left? We got our framework. With very little effort, we have hooked that framework up to the play button. Our loop that starts the game over is still working just the way it did before, but now it's under the control of the play button. The only thing we need now is sound, and we're done. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the sound file again just to refamiliarize ourselves with how this worked before. In SoundLua, which is in the scripts folder, what we did in here is we had a function to listen for an event called onSFX, on sound effects, and it would load up the appropriate sound file and find a free audio channel and then play that sound. The two sounds that we had were click and explosion, which I made the sound effects for because they didn't play through the speakers. So Ed's mouth sound effects for video here. And the other thing we had was a function called play soundtrack, which previously just had this line: load up the sound file, play the sound file. Now I modified it a little bit to fit into the framework because I wanted people to be able to turn on and off sounds. So the first thing I did was I added another function to this module called enable SFX, which takes one variable, one argument, enable, and basically sets this local variable to true or false depending on what you pass in. So if you pass in true, this will be true, and then later on when I look at it in the play function, if it's not true, I do nothing. If it is true, I go on and find a channel, verify that I got a channel, and then play the sound effect. I also wanted to be able to turn on and off the soundtrack. Now this was a little bit different. With the soundtrack, the first time you play it, you want to start it playing. It's going to be playing, and then the person's going to get sick of the music. They're going to go click on the music button. If you're like me, you listen to the soundtrack the first time, and then you turn it off. So they go in, the music's playing, and if they click on the button, what you really want to do is just pause the soundtrack. You could stop it and rewind it to the start, but I find it's better if you simply pause it, and if they decide they want to listen again, they click the button, and it starts playing from the point where you paused it. So what I did was I changed this a little bit. I added a variable called local first play. And what this does is if first play is true, it does all the stuff it used to do before to load it and start it playing. And I also set that variable to false, so this part of the code won't execute again. Then assuming that they press the button to pause, which I'll show you in a moment, to stop the soundtrack, so they clicked it to play, they didn't like the music, they clicked it again to stop it. We'll go ahead and pause it by pausing the channel that the music is playing in, channel 1. And then if they click play again, first play has since been set to false, because we already executed this code, and we simply resume the channel. So if we look at the interface, what I'm talking about here is they click this, and you can't hear it, you may be able to hear it. The music starts to play. I click it again, and at that point, this piece of code here executed. Then if I click it again, it goes through here, and it says, first play is false, so resume. Pause, resume. Now what about the sound effects? If I look at the options code here, I've got these two functions on music. So this bit of code was executing when I clicked the music button. And what it was doing is it checked to see if the button was set to true. It is selected, and in which case it would call play soundtrack. Otherwise, if it's false, it would call pause soundtrack. So this bit of code that we were just looking at. Oh, that soundtrack's driving. Can you hear the soundtrack?
No, and I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah,
I just wanted to mention that to everybody who's watching that Google Hangout's not going to play the audio for us. But if you download the code, which the link will be in the show notes, then you'll be able to see what Ed's talking, or hear what Ed's talking about.
Here, see. Hopefully, you can see what I'm talking about. So again, I click it. When the button is highlighted, it does play soundtrack, which was this function I just walked you through. I click it, and it is not highlighted, so it's toggled off, because this is a toggle button. It executes this piece of code, which is pause soundtrack, which simply pauses. Similarly, there's one for the sound effect. If it's selected, I say sound module enable sound effect. I pass in true. And if we look at that code, that's this little bit here where it simply just takes enable and stores it in SFX enable, which again we use later to determine whether or not to play the sound effect when we catch this event. And if I click it again, it passes in. Oh, idiot! I'm sorry. Passes in false. Okay, yes, this is coding errors. This is what I get. So, and it passes in false to disable. So the only other thing I did then, that hooked that up to the library. We now have the ability to turn on and off our music and sound effects. All I needed then was to add some sound effects calls in different places. So where do I need them? Basically, I need a click every time you click on anything, a button on the screen, and then I need the explosion sound when the player dies. So the way I do that is with these little calls right here. It's real nifty. I like to do it this way because it separates your code. So the sound effects code doesn't need to know about this code, etc. I mean, they're separated. I simply need to create this event. It goes out into the ether. This code here is listening for it, as we discussed on a previous episode. And it checks to see if it's supposed to play the music or the sound effects, and if it can find it, it does. So in any place where it made sense, so let's see, when you turn on the music, I play the click. When you turn off the music, I play the click, because I don't know if your sound effects are enabled. When you turn on sound effects, I first enable it, and I play the click. And then, if you click the back button, I play the click. And the only other place I need to play a click is in the touch. So in One Touch Lua, which is in scripts, we did this business where we would post the One Touch event, and for feedback, which I've turned off, we would change the color of the screen so you can see you had clicked. I just added this little call here, post the sound effect, click. Doesn't have to include the sound module here, it just sends it out into the ether. So the only other effect we need to hook up now is when you hit the wall and you die. So that's the explosion effect. So if you recall, there was a collision handler in player that did, among other things, handle the trigger. You hit the trigger, it would increase your score. But it also handled hitting the wall. And I left this little message in here so you can search for it. It says, I hit a wall. If you search for that in player, you'll find a call to post on sound effects. But this time, we pass in explosion is the name of the sound effect. And when you hit the wall, it will play the explosion sound effect once, and you're dead. And that is it. We finished the game. I'll just be playing this now while you guys chit-chat. Or ask me questions.
So there's an explosion at the end. Of course, we can't hear it, but I'm assuming that it's an explosion.
Yes.
But the character doesn't go away.
No, the character doesn't go away. Just like in the original game. Wow, look at me, I'm so good. Just keep talking. I'm doing it.
Well, you're not having to think about what you're doing.
It killed me. Yes, just like in the original game. Oh, no. You know what? I take it back. I think the original game, right, exploded this and little particle bits came off.
So that would be an assignment for the viewer to
yes.
to explode the player at the end.
Right.
Yeah.
That's your assignment. Everybody take that away. Explode the player at the end. I'm not doing it for you. Unless by extremely popular request.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. Does anybody on the panel?
You can simply go out and experiment with CB effects and play a new CB effect that does an explosion, because I'm sure he's got one. Like the mortar is probably pretty close to what you need.
Yeah, and I think you've shown that one on one of the previous shows. You showed the mortar explosion. Yeah. The beginning. Yeah, somewhere in the beginning of the last show.
So,
all right.
I just want to say is that at the end of the game here, we've got quite a few files, and this may seem quite complicated to people, but you have to realize that every single file does one thing. It handles the player, it handles the sound, and the reason I did it this way is although it requires you to look at more files, you can take any one of these and reuse it in a future game. For example, I'm currently working on... Yes, that's it. That's that. My game crashed. Okay, I took this game. You don't get to see it today, and I modified it, and it doesn't look anything like. It's not like this game at all. But I still used a lot of the components from the show as the base and made a completely different game. So you can do this quite easily once you understand how the bits and pieces work.
Looks like it's missing a file someplace.
Yeah, it's probably the wrong folder. I've got so many things going on here.
But the important point, though, is that the project could have been coded up with like sort of
One big file.
Yeah, one big file, one-to-one, everything kind of mapped out and hard-coded or whatever you want to call it, and you wound up at the end with this one game. But I know you and Sergey and others are interested in kind of creating libraries that you can reuse because you know you're going to create more than one game, and you're interested in modularizing that.
I mean, yeah, exactly. What happens to me all the time when I do this is I'll be working on a game and I'll say, what if? And instead of recoding that game, I'll just make a whole copy and change the one module that affects the what if question I had, which can completely change the game. So like, what if I made pickups? Or what if I changed the orientation of the hallways? I could do that simply by replacing the wall module.
Yeah, which is, if you do a linear top-down sort of coding style, then you wind up having to go back and touch multiple places where you want to change something. Yeah, makes it much harder to experiment.
Yeah.
So okay, well, what I would say was go get Ed's code and look at what he's done, and like Ed's mentioned before, you don't necessarily have to agree with him 100%. If there's something that you like that he's done, keep it. If there's something that you don't like that he's done, don't do it that way in the future. But at least look at how he's separating everything up into modules, and how he's having the code interact with each other, and that in itself will be hugely valuable.
Yeah, this is not the end all. I mean, everybody has their own style. This is my style. I find that it works from case to case, and it should be relatively easy to follow.
Yeah.
And this is good development style. If you're serious about being a developer, even an indie developer that's only going to put out 1 or 2 games or apps a year, doing modular-based programming, you're going to thank yourself later. It just makes your life so much easier.
I think so. I was really torn when we started this on whether I should do it as like a very tight, just a few files, or just break it out and use my usual method. And I said, it's going to be too confusing for me, so I went with my usual method. Hopefully it's not confusing for the people who are watching this. Speaking of confusing, we're going to be doing another game, probably starting next week. That's up to you, Charles, though, because we got a couple of things on the future discussion. We got more games coming down the pike, but we also got discussions like contracting and some other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we want to break things up so that we're not doing just the whole show about game development or one particular game, but we'll kind of break it up to where we have different topics. But I'm all for it. Let's do another game, and then we can maybe do a little conversation about consulting or something on the side, or pick a topic. But we'll work on that.
Okay. Do you want to hint at what the next game is?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the next game is going to be a bit different, and actually it's going to be quite a bit simpler to develop because it's got fewer moving parts. It's going to be a memory game. It's a game you've seen a lot, a tile flipping game. Basically the way it works is you, let's see, I think I got a screenshot of a game that does something similar.
Yeah, kind of the like the children's card game kind of thing, where you flip over the cards and you can try to remember where they are.
Yeah. If you can see my screen here, I just randomly chose a game off of the Google Play. Won't show the title. Sorry, whoever authored this. Just using your graphic as a demo. Basically, you click a card, it flips over, it's got a bunny on it. You got to remember where that bunny is. You click another card, you go, there's the bunny. Then you get to click 2 in a row. If you click 2 in a row with the same card, you get a point. So cool. Something like that. I haven't worked out the exact details, but because there's a lot of variations on this kind of game as far as like the sequence of events, but it's nothing more than a card flipping memory game.
Well, the interesting part about these types of games is you may not, you may look at that and go, well, I'm not really interested in making a memory game or a children's game or whatever. But think of it in terms of the elements. Touching, one, there's a grid there of elements that are randomized, and when you touch one of them, one, you have to register the touch. Two, you have to animate the card flip or however you're just display the underlying image, and then you're doing matching to be able to figure out, did these two things match, and then move on. So there's going to be a lot of different elements to the game that you might be able to extract and use in something else that you're working on or have an idea for.
You always say it better than me. I made it sound so boring, but you're absolutely right. It contains a number of elements that answer questions that I've seen in the forums over and over. How do I do things in grids? How do I keep track of things in tables? How do I handle touches? How do I randomize? So those are the things we're answering. It's not about making that specific game. It's about answering questions that people have asked.
Yeah. So the same thing holds true for this endless runner that we just did. Go back and look at the code, and go back and watch the previous episodes. Ed's walked us through everything, and you can download the code and extract the pieces of it that you want. So definitely go do that. There's lots of templates out there that you can buy. Ed has even produced some templates, which you can find on his site at romangamer.com. But he's provided a lot of insights in this series, and you can use those for free. So there you go.
Actually, Charles,
yes, sir.
One thing I'd like to ask is people who are watching or listening is give feedback on things we could do or I could do differently, because this is a kind of a rough first start. We'd like to do more of these, but I would like to do it in such a way that it is useful to people. So if I'm doing something that makes it hard for people to understand, presenting in such a way, any kind of feedback whatsoever would be helpful.
Okay. I think you definitely need a hula skirt and potentially...
And a Groucho Marx mustache.
And a Groucho Marx mustache. So we'll start there. But yes, if you do have feedback, put them either in the comments below, or we'll have a link to the forum where you can discuss all of these shows there. We post links to the forum and the show notes and all that kind of stuff like that, so that we can discuss upcoming shows and we can also discuss previous shows. So there's lots of different places where you can speak up and say, hey, I wanted you to break down this a little bit more, or maybe I want you to go faster or slower or whatever. Just let us know how you want to do it, because these we want to do a lot of these series, and we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is useful to you. All right. Well, has anybody got anything else before we go?
Yeah, as usual, I want to invite everybody to our RC channel. So don't forget that you can communicate live with other developers and ask some questions and get answers.
Yeah, if you go to coronalabs.com/IRC, there's a page there that talks about the channel.
/IRC.
Yeah, the shorter version will kind of redirect there, but it's got all the information about IRC and how you can connect and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely check it out. There's a great group of people there.
Indeed.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Sergey. All right, guys. Well, that's it. Thanks for being here, and go download that code and spend some time with it. And we will be back here next Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific, talking all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. Until then, have a great week and happy coding.
See ya.
Bye.